What's going on, everybody? It's been a while. So, welcome back to the Apex Podcast. To give a little bit of context over the little bit of a gap over the last couple of months, because this is going to be the first episode that you guys hear after about 2 months of us kind of taking a break. And really, what I wanted to make sure that I took some due diligence and time to do. I had a conversation that was inspired by a now friend of mine named Vivian Nunez. And we talked about how over the course of building a brand, sometimes you can feel trapped in a version of yourself as you're scaling the brand. And at the end of 2021, I really felt as if I needed to take the podcast in a slightly different direction. And I wasn't really quite sure what that direction was going to be when I first kind of set out to make that decision. We're really going to try to get back to our roots. We kind of got off track a little bit, and we were talking really specifically about marketing and business and all of these tactics and all of these things, and it just didn't quite feel right because at the end of the day, all I really care about are talking to ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. So to kick that off, I am bringing a guest onto the show who I have had the absolute pleasure of collaborating with at a very, very close level over the last 3 months or so, to the point where we actually put 70 plus hours in and launched a workshop together. So, for those of you that have listened to me for a while, you know that I went to school for nursing, graduated, started working as an ICU nurse, and then when COVID hit, had the opportunity to kind of jump in and start and scale my own business. And when I ran into our guest, it was through a curriculum called Indie Collective, which is basically a 10-week boot camp course, kind of like a modern MBA style structure. And we had multiple people. And Alyssa, you can kind of paint your picture of this when you come on, but from what I remember, there was like literally like 4 or 5 people that got in touch with me and said, you need to talk to this human, specifically because we want to see what happens when you talk to this person. And so I get excited when other people get excited for me to meet people, and immediately was like, yeah, let's get something on the books and talk. And then I'm pretty sure it was literally our first conversation that we were like, yeah, we're going to build a workshop together. So without a further ado, I would like to welcome, now proud to call one of my dear friends, Miss Alyssa Greenfield. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, my version of the story is pretty similar to yours. I joined this boot camp and I decided, as someone who's usually an introvert, I'm just going to go out there, talk to everyone, make all these connections. And then your name kept coming up and kept coming up. And then I think I messaged you on LinkedIn about something
Mm-hmm.
completely unrelated. And you just said, well, what a coincidence. We should probably finally have that call that everyone has been telling us we need to have.
Right. Right. And then, greatness was born. So shameless plug for the two of us. We did just finish collaborating on a workshop specifically around assisting people identifying their true voice to bring to LinkedIn. So if you're somebody that has, always kind of felt like you have a story to tell, but you're not quite sure what it is, or you know what your story is, but every time you go to post something about it, you get scared and you don't know if you want to put it out into the world. Our entire structure is meant to really help you fix the 3 core things that we really identified as, blocks to writing copy. And that's, how do you come up with ideas? How do you write those ideas down in a way that makes sense to you and that other people will understand? And how the hell do you get over the imposter syndrome of being able to push that post button? And so I'm like super, super proud of that. But this will be a great way for you to get to know both of us at the same time, and kind of understand a little bit more of our backgrounds and what we bring to the table. So, Alyssa, I would love to start off just by getting people an introduction to kind of who you are and a little bit about your upbringing. So, where were you born and raised? And then where did you go to school? What did you go to school for? And let's just kind of fill in a little bit of those background details to bring people up to speed.
Yeah, so I've had a zigzag of a career path, and everything is really united by words. I'd say I grew up saying I'm a word nerd. I had a grandmother who would mail me clips from the newspaper with things circled that were spelled wrong. And I just grew up around that environment where people loved words and loved making sure that they were out there in the proper way. And so I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey. I guess you could say Jersey Shore, which I was made fun of when I went to college in upstate New York. But I loved it there, nothing like the show. And I discovered journalism by chance in high school. It was one of the only electives that fit into my schedule. And I didn't even know what journalism was as a sophomore in high school. And I just decided to take a chance. I knew I loved writing and I fell in love with it to the point that I took my senior year study hall and worked on the paper instead of just relaxing during study hall because I loved it so much and it didn't fit into my schedule that year. So when I say word nerd, and I've been using
Mm.
that to describe myself for a long time, like true, like word nerd to the core. So I ended up going to school for magazine journalism, which didn't last so long as a career path. I do remember I was in a Borders store, which doesn't even exist anymore, my senior year of high school. And I went to the careers section and I looked up books on college majors and I saw journalism and I saw the starting salary in that book. And as you can probably guess, it was very low. But at the time,
Right.
never having a career, I thought, oh my God, that is more money than I've ever had in my life. I'm
Right.
in. That's the perfect major. Uh, so my career has really been a series of pivots from magazine, getting laid off about 9 or 10 months into that job in the middle of my first lease in New York City and completely panicking
Oh, no.
to getting into the agency world doing content. I briefly worked at a startup. I led content at a global enterprise tech company. And so I sort of just collected lessons over the years that made me feel comfortable after all of that to start my own business.
Mm, mm. Now, like, losing the job that you were thinking was gonna be a little bit more stable in the middle of your first lease in New York City. So I'm trying to put myself back in the headspace of who I was, like, when I, like, first got my first lease of an apartment. I would have probably shit myself. If that would
Yeah.
have like, I'm thinking like nowadays, it's like, oh, okay, like I can figure some stuff out. Like I've been in life, quote unquote, I've been engaged with life long enough that I can be like, okay, sometimes these clusters happen and you have to figure them out. But like fresh off the block, like new lease, new job, like how did you deal with the stress of that? Or what was that situation like?
Not well. I remember a lot of tears. I think the editorial director of the publication, like heard me crying in the bathroom at one point at the magazine's offices and like hugged me, and I didn't even know her, but she felt terrible. It was a situation where the publication got bought by another company, and they didn't really
Right.
lay off people based on what their roles were. They just made a business decision, and I was a full time freelancer. But yeah, I mean, I panicked. I knew that it was hard to find a job in my field. I only saw myself as somebody who does editorial entry level at magazines,
Mm,
and I had seen people graduate 1 or 2 years before I did and have a terrible time finding jobs. Most
mm,
people who graduated with me hadn't even found their first job by the time I got laid off from my first job. So I just started panicking and applying to everything and telling my network that, I needed them to kind of help me out as much as possible. And it ended up happening. I had a friend from college who knew someone who was leaving a job that was almost identical down to the subject matter.
hmm,
Um,
hmm.
and I interviewed for that and I got the job, and it was a really easy transition.
Right.
So it worked out, but I didn't think that it would until the moment that it did, because I wasn't getting calls back from a lot of other companies. I was just blindly applying to everything that I saw and hoping for the best. and hoping that I could pay my rent in Brooklyn. And even with a
Mhm.
roommate, it was not cheap.
No, I think that I'm just gonna call this out right now. Like I always when I'm recording a podcast episode, there's always something that just jumps out as needing to be the overarching theme, right, of the show. And I think you articulating that part of the story just kind of gave us that theme. And so if you're listening to the podcast, you're going to be hearing the title of the podcast right now. This is like a Family Guy cameo type of deal. This is going to be a podcast episode focusing on the fact that the impossible can happen, or you may not think that it's going to happen until it happens. I think that that is a really good statement to articulate pretty much our entire experience together. Thus,
Hmm.
it's like you don't believe that it's going to happen until it happens. I know that, like yesterday, for example, we pushed the publish button on the workshop together, and it was like, holy crap, like that actually just happened.
It still
And
doesn't
it's
feel real
impressive.
24 hours later. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking, I love that focus though, right? How even after losing the job, right? And you say you remember a lot of tears, right? And but the thing that really stood out to me there is that fortitude to have the ability to go forward and put yourself out into the network. There's some people that would be faced with that situation. And I know I personally have been faced with that situation and did not act that way, and did not go out and immediately start hitting my network to try to see if there would be willing, a job that would come out. But if you don't do those types of things, the alternative is there's no opportunity for anything to happen, right? It's like if it's as scary as it might be to ask somebody else for help or to lean on your network, the alternative is what? You know,
Yeah.
and nothing. A guaranteed no, because you don't put yourself out there. And
Yeah.
I think that it's just that's a beautiful kind of pushing yourself out into the world there. It actually one of the things that we do is ask questions prior to you coming on the show. And one of the things that you put in here is a quote by Anna Quindlen. And I'm just going to read that out loud, and then I just kind of want you to articulate the quote to us, as in the way that you have felt it resonate with you in your life. So the quote is this, and again, it's by Anna Quindlen. That's Quindlen. If you want to look her up. So it says, "Life is made of moments, small pieces of glittering mica in a long stretch of gray cement. It would be wonderful if they came to us unsummoned, but particularly in lives as busy as the ones most of us lead now, that won't happen. We have to teach ourselves how to make room for them, to love them, and to live. Really live." So why does that quote stand out to you so much in your life?
So it stood out to me when I first read it, and I was a freshman in college. Not a college that I ended up graduating from. I started in one place, realized it wasn't a fit, and ended up transferring for my sophomore year. But that fits in too because I've always been the type of person to trust my instincts, take a leap, and really just try things to have those moments. And as a
Mm,
writer, that was kind of how I worked through a lot of those things. And now that quote popped back into my head, I don't even know what, over a decade later, as I've been working on my own business, which I started this past summer. I've been doing a lot of reflecting on, growing up, my life, my career, these moments that were really tough, but I learned so much. And when that quote came into my head again, I just realized that I've kind of lived that. Like it got into my head 10, 12, 15 years ago, and ever since then, I've really been focusing on these moments and the story behind those moments and using words to make sense of them. And now I'm building a business that's largely about helping other people figure out those moments in that long stretch of gray cement and how can you
mm,
really uncover them? How can you, use them in the most effective way to tell your story, to market your business, whatever it is. I just feel like that's a helpful way for me to look at life, and she's a beautiful writer, so of course she was
Yeah.
able to articulate it in that way.
I think that's what's so beautiful about writing as a profession in general is like this gift of articulation. Now, how do you take this idea that somebody can feel, but they can't necessarily explain, and then explain it in a way that doesn't actually directly talk about the feeling itself, but makes them feel that thing? Like that's what
Mhm.
I thought is so cool about writing. It's like I when I write about something that I want somebody to feel nostalgic, I don't put feel nostalgia here. You know, like you can't do that.
Mhm.
I guess you could, but it wouldn't be super effective in my mind. But but if you write something nostalgic and you can evoke that feeling of nostalgia, then that is super beautiful. I at the end of this, you put that you get to interview these people and using the gray cement as like an analogy to how somebody might perceive their life. That it's
Mhm.
just bland, and like, "Oh, well, nobody will really care about this." But what we get to do, especially, in the worlds that we've built for ourselves over this, the last 5-10 years of us, trying to throw around the ideas of having the own business, is look at all of this mica that is in your cement. Like, look
Mhm.
at all of these moments that you're just brushing over, and they're so beautiful.
Yeah. And being able to, and we've talked about this in the past, that moment of transition from somebody thinking, oh, I'm just like everyone else. I don't have a story worth telling. Nobody's going to care about that, to hold on a minute. That's what you got from what just came out of my mouth in our interview is
Right.
pretty magical and amazing that we get to do this kind of work.
So do you like in that kind of vein, as we're like looking at all of these different moments and stuff like that, do you have like a Micah moment that stands out for you? As far as like the first time that you were like, yeah, I'm going to be a writer, or like, yeah, this is gonna be a thing.
Oh, that's a great question. I have moments that if they hadn't happened, I don't know if I would be where I am in my career. There have been a lot of
Mm.
those. And the first one was failing a journalism assignment my freshman year of college. um, I turned off spell check and I spelled the same word wrong multiple times. And my professor, he drew a line through the first page because he had had enough. There were two more pages, and I just kept spelling this one word wrong. And he just said, "F, come see me." And I was devastated because I'm a bit of a perfectionist and really
Right.
proud of. I couldn't see myself doing anything other than writing, so that's just like a punch in the gut to get something like that as feedback. So I stayed after class, hoping that I would get a chance to rewrite it. And I did. But what he said to me was, "What are you doing at this school? You
Mm.
are a really talented writer. You can go here and here and here. And there are these amazing journalism programs. And this is not one of them. Like, there are a lot of great things about this school, but it is not a school for journalism. What are you doing here?"
Hmm.
And
Wow.
he said, "If you want to go to any of these top journalism schools, like, I will write you a letter of recommendation, like, apply, go." And I applied, and there was a really slim chance as a transfer student getting into the journalism school at Syracuse. And I remember sitting on my bed in my dorm room when I got that acceptance in my email. And again, I just completely started crying because I never thought I would get in. I
Right.
was completely shocked that
Right.
that was sitting in front of me on my little 2007 MacBook screen. uh, and it's not school. It's just this feeling of, taking a leap and it all working out. It was really what I was able to make of the experience of being in that school and prove to myself that I could do it that was the beginning of a lot of really great things in my life and my career.
What an amazing momentum shift on behalf of that teacher.
Mhm.
You know, like those are the moments where I mean we've talked at length, you know, off mic about my career in mental health nursing. So for those of you that I guess maybe my audience doesn't even know, you know, because I don't know if I talked about it a whole lot on the
It's
podcast.
time.
So yeah, guys, I've been working as a psych nurse for the last like 6 months, 7 months. And one of the things that I've really learned while working in I specialize in pediatric psych, and one of the things that I've really learned inside of that space is how absolutely insanely important it can be to vocalize when you see passion and potential in another person. Like, all the times with the kids, I mean, it can completely change a kid's day around. It can completely change the way that they're approaching therapy, how well their medications are working, uh, because, you know, we're dealing with kids with a substantial amount of trauma. So if you're, you know, showing them that you believe in them, that's enough to really, really fundamentally change their version of what reality looks like to them. And that teacher taking the time to say, what are you doing here? I will write you a recommendation letter to help you get to where you need to go is just I wish that restores my faith in humanity. That story just made me happy
Yeah.
for the rest of the day.
Yeah, and he was seen as one of the toughest teachers. People were afraid to be in his class, and yeah, I never saw it coming, but
Hmm.
it was incredible.
So then you started it. So then you went through the journalism program at Syracuse.
I did. I got into the magazine journalism program, which I'm sure does not exist anymore because sadly, neither do magazines. Uh, but I did, and it was so tough. I went from feeling like I was, one of the strongest writers at this really small school to one of the weakest writers, and also coming in a year later than everyone else at
Right.
this giant university. Um, so I panicked a lot those first couple of months and then settled in and ended up absolutely loving it.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm wondering, like, when you say weak, like a weak writer versus like feeling like a stronger writer and stuff, like what are some things that stood out to you outside of, I don't know, maybe grammar or punctuation? Like when you think of what makes a strong writer, what are things that come to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to what you were saying before about being able to make people feel something. I saw all these writers who were just really strategic. It felt like that first year, the courses that were required for that first year at Syracuse, it was much more about a way of thinking about content, a way of thinking about storytelling,
Mm,
that I still think impacts the way I write and edit and strategize. It just felt like they had an advantage, and there was such a high standard for everyone there, and the professors were so accomplished in their careers, and I just felt like I can't hang with these people. Like, what
right.
am I doing? Maybe I never should have left this school that I came from. And then I found my people, I found my professors who were kind of coaching me through it, and eventually it became okay. But yeah, when I think about that school, it was really, they taught us more a way of thinking about journalism, about editing, design, which I had no future in,
Mhm.
and I knew that, but it
Mm.
was a requirement. It really was that. It's not something that can be replaced when all of the magazines go away. It's
Right.
this foundational approach that is just so useful in life, regardless of what you end up doing.
Yeah, I think that's what's so important about schools. Like, I talk to people all the time about how much I just defend the humanities in general, and how much it worries me that we were so STEM focused for so long, as a society in general, and um, you know, how many people that I talk to that they've almost lost that. ability to kind of read between the lines. Like when I was thinking about, what makes a strong writer for me, because I get to cheat as the host, right? Like I get to listen to your answer and then think about it while you're talking. Um, like when I read somebody like Hemingway or Poe or Frost or Emily Dickinson, like these prolific writers, there's times where I'll read some of their stuff and it's like they're showing me a piece of reality that I wasn't aware of before. But then it like, oh, that makes sense. And like the hair will stand up on the back of my neck. And I'm like, wow, like that. Okay. Like I haven't been able to put my finger on that before, but that's definitely what that is.
Hmm.
Have you ever like read something and just been like, ooh, like that was fantastic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm I feel like I'm very picky about, reading things, and I think that's what it is. It's that I have this expectation to have writing completely change my perspective on something or make me
Mm,
feel something that I'm not going to forget for years or maybe forever. And I can't think of anything specific right now, except for maybe that Anna Quinlan example, because that's
right.
still stuck with me in so many ways. But all the time. And a lot of times it's something that I read from someone who is not famous.
Yep.
They just took a risk. They decided to tell their story. They decided to be vulnerable. And because they did that, they will never know how many people they impacted who are going about their days and can't stop thinking about that thing they shared. And that
Right.
might be, it might be an entire essay. It might be a couple of sentences that were super vulnerable. It doesn't matter. But that's these days, a lot of times when it happens, a stranger or somebody I just met
Mm.
decides to share something and it just sticks with me and changes me.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's why I love having conversations with people in general. It's just you never, as much as you think you know about a person, you never know what's going to come out when
Mhm.
you're in the middle of a conversation like that. So, okay, so you got this recommendation from a teacher. You go to Syracuse, you go through the journalism program for magazines and such. And then, we kind of talked a little bit about your first job out of college, and then losing that midway through the lease and everything. You got your second position. Let's transition more into like, okay, let's fast forward a little bit. You're in your career at some point. What was the last career that you had prior to jumping into the space of being an independent?
Yeah. So I had, when I got it, what was a dream job. I was actually commuting to a startup in New York City at the time, and it just wasn't a fit for so many reasons. Bad manager, and terrible commute, and just not the opportunity that I was hoping for. And I spent those train rides after a point just scrolling through jobs on my phone and clicking apply on anything that was close to my house. And this company happened to be 20 minutes from my front door, and they were looking for like I don't know, a head of content or content manager.
Mm,
And so I just hit apply, and a recruiter got back to me, and I'd never heard of this company. I had never heard of the industry. They had never hired a content person.
mm,
They were a 50-year-old tech company. And I just loved the people. It was like this feeling in an interview that I had never had before, that like
mm,
I want to work with these humans. I don't know anything about the subject matter, but I know that they'll give me a chance to figure it out, to try things, to make
mm.
an impact on this company. And they believe in the power of content. And so I ended up spending 3.5 years leading their global content and social media program as a one woman team, with some support from freelancers and coworkers who were not in content. Um, and it was amazing in so many ways. It was like dream team, dream manager, just such room to try things, test things, grow, not worry about making mistakes. And I reached a point of burnout that was less about that job and more about becoming a parent
Mm,
about week 2 of COVID when nobody knew anything. And then coming back from maternity leave, feeling like I wanted to go full force into leading this content program and not ramp back up. Um, because I tend to have, only one speed.
mm,
When I'm excited about something, I want to just go all in. But the world had changed since I had
right.
a kid, and that was just a recipe for getting completely burnt out and exhausted. And I had always said that I never wanted to go out on my own. I would do freelance work on the side. It was nice to have that extra income to spend on fun things, but I needed a steady paycheck from a corporate job. It's just not me. And all of a sudden, a few months before I left that job, something just shifted in my mind. And I thought, I feel like the cure to burnout is building my own business, which would sound crazy to a lot of
I was gonna
people.
say, I was like, I don't know. Maybe
But
after the first few years, yeah, but I mean, the long-term cure is definitely burnout, but yeah.
yeah, but it has been, because what I realized I needed was to be able to make an impact, and not in
Mm,
just a superficial way, to really see my work, you know, change the way that people are having conversations with their employees, with their customers. Um, I always felt like the content that I did in any job could only go so far in the corporate
right,
world. Um, and this was a chance to really be the salesperson, be the marketer, be the writer, be the strategist, all of these things that I kind of picked up along the way watching other people, and some skills that I had kind of had all along. It was just refreshing. It was, there's nothing holding me back from just trying all of these things and tinkering, which is, I think, a word that both of us have talked about a lot, how
yes,
we really
yes,
love just tinkering. Um, and I realized that all I wanted was to work with really cool people, you know, build a community of other freelancers so I didn't feel alone, and try stuff and figure out what works, whether that's for promoting my own business or supporting clients.
right, right. Hmm. Well, okay, so then that kind of leads us into, and spoiler alert here, the company that Alyssa launched is called Owl Street Content. And that's the collaborative effort. So if you are end up looking for the workshop, I'll make sure that we put that in the show description. But you'll see it's Apex Communications Network and Owl Street Content. And just so that nobody gets confused, that's secretly Alyssa Greenfield and Jan Almasy. But we're just fancy and we put the names of our companies up there. Um, so let's talk about Owl Street then. So you had this experience where you're like you can only take content so far. Feel like the cure to burnout was starting your own business, um, which is interesting. But it was also, you know what? I'll take that back. It is definitely a cure for feeling like you're spinning your wheels. Like the moment I think that I've worked harder than I've ever worked in my entire life since starting my own business, but I've been happier than I've ever been in my entire life after starting my own business. And that's the trade-off that I think I wanna make sure that I'm articulating from my side is like, it's going to be hard work, but it doesn't feel like burnout as much.
Mhm.
At least that's been my experience. Um, so you start Owl Street. What kind of where did that come from? Owl Street content. That name in general. Is it just like a random word generator on Google, or did you see the bird and all of a sudden feel inspired?
So the way it started is not the meaning that it ended up taking on, I'll
Okay.
say. Um, it was one of those things where I think my mother-in-law asked my husband, "We need to get Alyssa a gift for her birthday. What is she like?" And he said, "I don't know, owls." And it became, I now have owl towels two sets of owl salt and pepper shakers, an owl ring, an owl shirt, like everything that there could be an owl on. My brother-in-law just sent me an owl mouse pad. So it got really
That's
out of
awesome.
control. So out of control. Um,
I'm picturing owl
but
salt and pepper shakers. Those are cute.
it just became, yeah, two. So if you want a pair, I got one for you. I don't use either of them actually. We use a really
Shh,
boring.
we won't tell
But
brother-in-law.
I know. If you're listening, I'm sorry. Um, but it at some point just took on this other meaning, and I started looking into the significance of owls, and I was seeing some things about resiliency, and there were just so many traits, wisdom that really made a lot of sense. It was almost as if, my brain at the time just said, here's a random thing that I like that you can get me 20 million gifts related to.
Mhm.
Um, but really, owls resonated with me in a lot of different ways. And the more I read about, the significance, the symbolism of them, it just made a lot of sense.
Right, right. Yeah, because when I think of an owl, I think of like sage wisdom. I think of um, being able to see well at night, like you're able to see through the darkness.
Hmm.
There's a bunch of things that definitely stand out. I was always curious about that because I really love owls too. I actually have had a couple of dreams where like owls are like my spirit animal. So I was like super interested in what that origin story really was. Um, so what exactly, if you had to kind of, in a elevator pitch, I guess, of what Owl Street has become, or like what you're really passionate about delivering through that, what would that be?
Yeah. It's so there are two different ways that I support clients, but it all comes down to making sure they get their message and what they're passionate about out into the world in the clearest, most compelling way possible to the right audience. The way that plays out is thought leadership strategy, where some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, where you don't realize that you have all these nuggets of wisdom and experience and stories that exist at the intersection of what you do or what your company does and who you are and why you do it. So uncovering that and channeling that into um, marketing, messaging,
Mm,
helping people really connect with who you are as a thought leader. And then doing that for companies as well. Some really foundational marketing work, content marketing work that really all starts with that who, if you want to, there's another way to owls, huh? Um, but but yeah, really figuring out, what does your company do that, and who are you? What is your vision that has meaning? Not just, what do you sell? Not just product descriptions, but let's figure out a way for you to stand out as a person or a company that's authentic, that's memorable, that your competitor will never be able to do
right.
because they haven't lived the same thing.
Right. Well, and the crazy thing is that now that, we've both kind of been through this phase of launch and, articulating our ideal customers and going through all of these phases of growth, which if anybody has any questions about any of the things that we've talked about, I know we've kind of used some industry specific language or maybe some things that you may not be aware of what exactly they mean if you haven't been in entrepreneurship. And so, if there's anything that you are listening to right now that you're kind of like, oh, I'm not really sure what that means, feel free to shoot us messages. You can add us on LinkedIn, Alyssa Greenfield or Jan Almasy. That's spelled like Jan, Jan, on LinkedIn. And we'll definitely gladly answer them. Uh, and but like we go through this phase where we're growing and we're doing all of these other things, and then we kind of get to the other side, and at this point you've worked with dozens of people, I've worked with dozens of people. We've articulated these messages over and over again. We've watched companies implement our messaging schemes and grow and scale, um and then we get to this phase where we're at right now, right? Where like we're building workshops, we're ready to start entering that. Okay, we survived the cluster of kind of getting our feet wet and ready to rock and roll. We've got a decade plus of experience between the two of us, and we're trying to pass these lessons on. And now I'm curious for you personally, like when you're thinking about friends that want to become writers or people that you have talked to that maybe have approached you for mentorship and want to enter this field. And for anybody that's listening right now, that's like, man, I've been really interested in journalism my whole life, or I've always wanted to be a writer, or they're a college kid and they're not quite sure what direction they want to go. What are some pieces of advice when it comes to not just getting into your field of practice, as a writer specifically, but maybe just being a creative as a whole? What are some pieces of advice that we could pass down the line and say, like, hey, if you feel a calling to enter a creative career, here are some things that I wish I would have known or thought about?
Yeah. Yeah. So I wish I would have known that you can pull from your experience and apply it to so many other things. You might have a journalism major, you might major in PR, you might major in economics, and there are still things that you will have learned in that degree program that you can apply to whatever you're passionate about, even if you didn't major in something creative.
Mm,
I think a lot of people think, well, I have this training, so these are the jobs that I can do. And I found it so inspiring that when I worked at a PR and content agency, we had people who majored in psychology, economics, people who really attributed the fact that they loved going out and singing karaoke to the fact that they were awesome at PR, people who did Teach for America. Um, and we actually had a blog series at one point about people who have non traditional backgrounds. And that
mm,
agency was really passionate about bringing in people who did not come from traditional training and had never worked for an agency before, because it's often really hard to get in the door at an agency if you don't have an agency job before that, which, like, yeah, you
right.
have to start somewhere. But there's so much that you can pull from your experience that makes you qualified, that you might not realize. And I think that's been the biggest thing. The second thing would be just try things. If you're curious about doing more on LinkedIn, which I keep coming back to just because we've been working on our workshop for
I
so
was gonna
long.
say, yeah, the
Uh,
fact that we've been spent like
yeah,
70 plus hours talking about it, so it's definitely like all over our brains right now.
all LinkedIn all the time, unintentional, constant plugs. But if you've been thinking about it, just get out there and start sharing things. And yeah, it's going to feel really uncomfortable if you start posting things on LinkedIn, if you start, I don't know, if you start a blog, whatever it is, if you reach out to, you know, somebody at your dream company and say, I would love a job there. Can I talk to you? All those things feel really uncomfortable, especially when you don't think you're qualified. But I've gotten so many opportunities and learned so much just from taking those risks.
I'm picturing the Nike commercial with the dude from Transformers in it, where he's just like screaming, "Just do it" at people. That's like the only thing that popped in my mind. I think it's Shia LaBeouf. Is that how you say his name? And he's
Yeah.
just like
Yeah, I think
literally like
so.
walking up and just like, "Just do it." Um, but I mean that's true. And the ironic thing is that like I know one thing that I really empathize with when you're saying that whole like taking the leap, and just kind of like going out there and trying things is that I was so coming from the military background, you have a very, very close knit group of community. You have a very defined purpose. You have a very structured organizational structure. Like it's not easy to succeed in the military by any means, but it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple, if that makes sense. Um, and jumping out and wanting to start my own business, I was like, I'm losing my entire network.
Mhm.
Or at least that's what I felt like. I felt like, okay, I'm losing my support system. I am, I need to be able to bounce ideas off of people. That's how I think. I need to have this close knit group of people. Like, where am I going to find these people if I start my own business? I'm going to be all alone out there. And then I realized, like, then getting into the course, like Indie Collective or Groove is another app that I love using, that I get to meet and talk to a whole bunch of really cool people throughout the day. Getting on LinkedIn and just posting more transparently and more vulnerably. Like, I've found people in my comments on LinkedIn posts that have now become friends. And if there's one thing that I want to hammer down or like double click on out of what you just said. It's like, if you're sitting there and you're nervous about starting your own business or starting your own venture because you're afraid of losing a network, A, that network will always be your network. Like, they're not going to abandon you strictly because you're not there anymore. And if they do, the way I've always looked at it is that I'm come from a religious background. I'm like, God's just making room for better humans in my life, and I've almost always had that come to fruition where now I have you, Sam, I've Mel Rip, I've got Kat Coffrin. There's all of these amazing humans that I've been able to network with that now feel like my family, right? It's like I have my own business, but I know that I have this group to lean on. And that was
Yeah.
something that I definitely was afraid I wasn't going to be able to find, and it's kind of true to our theme of the podcast. It's just like, you don't think it's going to happen until it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there's something about figuring out what you're really passionate about and leaning into that and sharing it with people that starts to attract the supporters and the mentors. And I always felt like I never had a mentor.
Mm,
I've learned from a ton of people, but I really never had one in a traditional sense. I've always been the only person in my role at every company where I've worked. And
wow, that's an interesting
once
career
I
path.
yeah, uh, there were people who did related things, but with the exception of one job, that agency job, there were other people doing content, but on different accounts. So I would lead an account and I'd be the only content person to really figure it out for that client. And so I always felt like something was missing. And then all of a sudden, I left my corporate job, started building my own business, had this moment of realizing I'm clearer about how to describe what I do more than I've ever been in my life. And right around that same time, I felt like all of these people they were my people, they got it, just started coming out of all of these spaces, and this community started forming. And you know, I really haven't felt alone, thankfully, for the majority of my time in the past year building my business because of that.
Right, right. Well, I think that it's like, you go out on these journeys, and you never know what you're it's like the most beautiful and the most frightening part about it, right? It's like, you don't know what you're going to find until you go out there to try to find it. I always use this example, um, where I'm like, uh, you could be in the woods, starving, and praying to God that you get sent a rabbit, right? So, like, all I want is like a rabbit or like some animal like we can hunt and then we can eat, and things will be fantastic again. Like, think about our ancestors. And my grandpa always used to say growing up, he's like, yeah, you can pray as hard as you want and God may send you the rabbit, but if you don't set a trap for the rabbit, you're screwed. Good luck trying to catch it.
I love that.
And so he's like, you
Yeah.
can rely. He always related it back to euchre too. He's like, and euchre is a game that, a card game that we play in the Midwest. But you rely on yourself for 2 points and you rely on your partner for a third point. And it's like, you can rely on God to put it right in front of you, and he may, provide you all the ingredients, but you still gotta hunt, you still have to prepare, you still have to cook the food, and you still have to eat the meal. Um,
Mhm.
and I've always thought about that going through. It's like, you can think or try to hypothesize as much as you want about what may or may not be, but you're never going to know what the future actually holds as potential unless you go out there and see what happens. Um,
Yeah.
and I kind of wanna bring us full circle and really kind of give you the floor on this one last point that I think is really, really important, because In the context of going on this journey, um, everywhere over like the last 5 years or so, there's been this like Instagram hustle culture. There's been this culture of grinding and like just kind of pushing yourself to the point of burnout and, really kind of going on all full cylinders. And if you're not working out 3 times a day and eating everything right and building your own business to millions of dollars a year, you're a shitbag. And it's like, I don't believe in any of that. And you straight up said in one of the answers that you sent over here. I'm just going to read it directly from the answer document and then just kind of give you the floor to hear your thoughts. You said, "Don't wait until you're an expert to start or share your journey. Also, never become an expert. Taking
Mhm.
people along on your journey is so much more powerful than telling them what you know." That
Yeah.
that last line, just like I knew as soon as I read that that was going to be the last thing that I wanted to bring up because that's so powerful.
Yeah, I feel like I see people sharing things as truth, whether it's in social media is a big one. Even some top books that everyone raves about. And I have a real problem with people saying this is the way to do it. Here's how you should do it. I know because I have figured this out and I've hacked the approach to getting the most engagement and getting leads from LinkedIn. And I mean, people who can build a business around that, more power to them. But I was onboarding my replacement at this corporate job that I left last year, and I spent almost no time presenting on how I thought she should do the job and the real, the stuff that you can look up. I really talked about, these are the hurdles that I came up against. These are the things that I wish I did differently. I want to make
Mm,
sure that you're prepared for this, and then with that foundation, I want you to be able to overcome those same hurdles and figure it out in your own way.
mm,
And
mm.
that's how I tend to, I'll give you general, like, I did this thing and it worked for me in terms of, cold emailing HR people at jobs when I wanted to find a job at a startup. I did that. It tended to work fairly well. Maybe other people can try it and do it their own way. But I try to really put a limit on the advice giving and focus way more on the good, bad, ugly, confusing, frustrating journey of figuring it all out.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that I think that what I've really seen on LinkedIn that really stands out to me is as the posts that I get really excited to read and the posts that I just scroll past. And it's not just LinkedIn, I mean just social in general. Is I can tell at this point and listeners, if you're listening to this and you've ever experienced this or you've kind of felt something similar, feel free to shoot something in. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this too. But I feel like there's a blatant difference between how easy it is to just tell somebody something and how transactional that feels versus how difficult it can be to write in a way that somebody can see themselves in you and then translate
Mhm.
it into their experience. That's two completely different styles of writing. And one of them is very product description sales gimmicky. And the other one is very much like, let me let you in behind the scenes of what kind of shit show I've been dealing with. And hopefully, some of the things that I've done to avoid some of the potholes are also useful to you on your journey. And those are the posts that I really love reading because I'm like, this is something that this person has genuinely personally experienced and they want to be able to help me not feel so alone, not sell me something.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's dangerous to be telling people what to do because then they're just going to follow it, and or if they follow it, it's so easy to lose their identity and their own story and how it plays into what they're doing. And I don't know about you, but I want to see more people sharing their stories and taking me along for their journey. That's the kind of content that I love to read. You don't have to be a perfect writer, you don't have to be a marketer or a content creator. It just,
Right.
people who feel comfortable getting out there and sharing their stories, and kind of passing on that vibe of journey versus, let me tell you how to do this, is definitely needed, especially right now.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. Well, okay, so I think that's pretty much wraps us up. I think that I love this through line that we kind of were able to build today, which I never really know where these podcasts are going to go. That's what I love about recording these types of shows where they're a little bit more open ended. But I, the listeners, if there's anything that I would want to part you with, it's if you have the opportunity to look Alyssa up on LinkedIn, do that 100%. Check out her content. She writes a lot of really, really cool stuff. A lot of things that I feel very are very relatable, and might help you identify a little bit of clarity maybe in what you're seeking. And then also, understand that everything that we're doing is a journey. Like, I don't care if you're in the corporate world and you're battling your way up the ranks and that's where you want to stay and that's what you see for yourself. If that is what you see for yourself and that's where you feel the most comfortable and that's where you want to go, kill it. Go for it, get after it, make it happen. I'm proud of you for going after it. And there will never be a time, because I've gotten this critique a couple of times and I want to make sure that we squash this right now. It's like, there will never be a time where I'm going to shit on you for not being an entrepreneur. Like, I get it. That it is not a field that I would recommend for everybody. And if everybody were entrepreneurs, then we wouldn't have anybody working for anybody, and the world would be really, really weird. So, I want to make sure that that's something that we're getting across, is that, like, these messages are really meant to empower you on your journey, regardless of where you're headed or what you're doing. It's just meant to really help you authentically bring yourself to the table. And I've been super, super impressed with Alyssa ever since I first met her. I'm super excited that she was willing to come on the podcast with us today. And I will leave you guys with that. So until next time, if you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can click the link in the description, or go ahead and share this episode with a friend if you think that this was something that impacted you. We don't monetize. I have no ads. I never will on this podcast because I don't believe in monetizing your guys's attention. I'm grateful that you were willing to sit here with us for an hour. So if you found some value in this, and you really can think of somebody that needs to hear this, maybe it's a friend that wants to be an author someday, or somebody that's struggling to figure out whether or not they want to go to school or not, and they would benefit from hearing Alyssa's journey, just send it their direction.